Introducing YouTube memberships, a fun way to support the channel while getting some exclusive perks. Click the join button to become a member now and get benefits like badges next to your name on videos, behind-the-scenes photos, advantages during the live trivia game, discounts on merchandise, private one-on-one video chats, the ability to request future video topics, and exclusive 8 to 10 minute videos on the history of the NFL. And now, on with our feature presentation. The 1970 season for the New York Giants was, by all accounts, a highly successful one, where they exceeded all expectations that anyone had for them. The Giants had fallen from grace over the latter half of the 1960s, not having a winning record since 1963. However, during the 1970 season, in the first season in the post-merger era, they were right in the thick of things, and ended the year with a 9-5 record. Alex Webster, for his efforts, was named the Coach of the Year. The offense, which was anemic in 1969, to the point where they ranked 4th from the bottom in points scored, went from averaging under 19 points per game to 21.5 points per game, ranking 8th in the 2016 league. And the Giants, despite an 0-3 start to the season, ended up rebounding incredibly nicely, winning 9 of their ensuing 10 games, and being in a position where if they beat the Los Angeles Rams on the final week of the season, they would go to the playoffs as the winners of the NFC East. That didn't happen, but you can learn more about that and the bizarre playoff scenario in 1970 by clicking the card in the upper right corner. However, at the end of the day, the Giants, despite their success, missed the playoffs, missing it by one measly game. If they were 10-4, they'd be in. If they were 10-4, not only would they be in the playoffs, but they would be the NFC East champion. The Cowboys, who made the Super Bowl that year, might not even make the playoffs, as that final wildcard spot between Dallas and Detroit at 10-4 would have been decided by a coin flip. Chaos would have ensued, and the entire complexion of the season looks entirely different. Which means it would be a real shame if the Giants missed the playoffs because of one game that was decided by an absolutely horrible call at the very end. It would be a real shame if the Giants had a surefire win snatched away from them by the officials. And it's odd, because more than 50 years later, this blown call seems to have been forgotten. Unless you were a fan at the time and remember this, today, this is just a footnote in NFL history. But it's a really important footnote, because this call had a massive ripple effect, because it not only cost the Giants the game, but it changed the entire complexion of the 1970 season, and maybe NFL history. And you'll see what I mean by that in just a bit, because I am not exaggerating when I say that. Because in Week 3 of the 1970 season, the New York Giants played the New Orleans Saints, and to say that controversy ensued would be a massive understatement. Because this is the story behind the blown call that changed the entire 1970 season and NFL history. Before I talk about the call itself and the reaction to it, as well as how everything would have changed, we need some context to understand how the game itself was going. It's October 4th, 1970. It's Week 3 of the NFL season, and we've got a monumental game on our hands down in New Orleans at Tulane Stadium between the New York Giants and the New Orleans Saints. For the Giants, this season had not exactly gotten off to the best of starts, I'll put it like that. After losing by 2 scores in Week 1 to the Chicago Bears, a team who had 1 win the previous year, and 3 scores in Week 2 in a blowout to the Dallas Cowboys, it felt as though the Giants had to win this game to keep their season alive. Drop to 0-3, and your only real chance at making the playoffs is to run the table. Your season is in grave danger of being over before Columbus Day, which is crazy to think about, but that was the spot that the Giants put themselves in, and that's what they were looking at heading into this game. Now, the good news for the Giants was that, at least on paper, they were dominating this game. You look at the box score, and this should not have been a contest. The Giants outgained the Saints in total yardage 361 to 183, basically doubling their output there. The Giants outgained the Saints 22 to 10 in first downs, more than doubling their output there. The Giants outgained the Saints 210 to 92 through the air, more than doubling their output there. And midway through the second quarter, the Giants had a 10-0 lead, and were seemingly on cruise control, well on their way to picking up their first win of the season. The bad news, though, as you could probably tell, was that despite all of that, By the latter parts of the fourth quarter, following a 15-yard touchdown by wide receiver Ken Burrow and a touchdown off of a block punt by Al Dodd, the Giants found themselves down 14-10. This was a game that the Giants had no business losing. They were the better side in every way. But somehow, they were down by 4 points, with time running out to salvage their season. But the Giants, despite all of that, had a chance to win this game. They had Fran Tarkenton at quarterback, and they were moving the ball down the field with about 45 seconds left. Now, for some reason, This Week in Pro Football says that there were 3 minutes left, but all newspaper accounts say that there were 45 or so seconds left, so make of that what you will. However, for the Giants, facing second down at the 5, their plan was simple. Get the ball into the hands of this man right here that you're watching, Aaron Thomas. Thomas had been a reliable tight end for the Giants for years, who had made many catches in big spots for the team before. He first joined the team in 1962, and by this point in his career, Thomas had amassed over 4,000 yards with the Giants and 34 touchdowns. He was a Pro Bowler in 1964. He led the league in 1965 amongst all qualified players with 23.4 yards per catch, and he was legitimately one of the best tight ends of the 1960s. Heck, by the time his career ended after that 1970 season, he was inside the top 5 in franchise history in receiving touchdowns, and still ranks 8th today. He was also 6th in franchise history at the time in receiving yards. Thomas was a good player, and he was one of the top players on the field during the game against the Saints, posting 3 catches for 35 yards. For some perspective, that was the same stat line as the top receiver that the Saints had during that time. The connection between Tarkenton and Thomas was a good one, and the plan on this play from the 5 was to get the ball into his hands in the back corner of the end zone to get the victory. And then, this is what happened next. Roll the tape.
With 3 minutes remaining and the Giants on the New Orleans 5-yard line, Tarkenton's pass to Aaron Thomas was ruled out of bounds.
Seriously, Thomas was ruled out of bounds. It was an incomplete pass. The Giants would fail to score on the drive, with Tarkenton throwing an interception right here 2 plays later, and the Giants would lose the game 14-10, dropping to 0-3. A heartbreaking finish coming down to a referee's decision on an extremely close call. Except for the fact that this really wasn't a close call, because this was very clearly a touchdown. I mean, there is no debate here. The man caught the ball with 2 feet in bounds. Let's pause it right here just to show how obvious this is. The white is out of bounds, but the gold and the green, they're in the field of play. He maintains control the entire time, so that's not the issue, even though the definition of control was extremely loose back then. Just ask Butch Johnson at Super Bowl 12 all about that. But does he get the feet in? Does he get the feet in? His feet are literally on the gold! Even if the green was out of bounds, that's a touchdown. He catches this with a solid 2 feet of space in between the end zone and the sideline. This was not even remotely debatable. This was a touchdown. In fact, in terms of passes to the end zone, where the guy is going to the ground, this might be the most obvious of all touchdowns. Heck, even Saints head coach Tom Fears said, "I thought it was good." Everyone thought this was a touchdown, except for the referees. Backfield judge Stan Javi ruled otherwise. No touchdown, Saints win. Now, there are certain calls where you can say, come on, sure that was a bad call, but you're just hypothetically assuming that everything stayed the same. Just because you give them points doesn't mean the game plays out the same way. However, this is absolutely not one of them. This play happened with 45 seconds left. By all accounts, there was little to no time left in this ballgame. Give the Giants the touchdown here that they deserve, and it's 17-14 in favor of New York. Now, could the Saints have moved the ball down the field in 30 seconds after the kickoff? I mean, in theory, they could have. However, their offense had scored just 7 points all game. The other 7 came off of a blocked punt. The offense had just 183 yards all game. The passing game, which is what the Saints would have had to rely on, was anemic, putting up just 92 net passing yards all game. The Saints would have had to rely on big chunk plays this late, and they had no plays go for 20-plus yards throughout the entirety of the contest. Maybe they could have tied it on a field goal. We know that Tom Dempsey has a strong leg, and a month later, he would hit that iconic 63-yard field goal against Detroit. But the odds if they win this game are virtually non-existent. If the referee gets this call right that you're watching, and you will be watching for the rest of this video, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. With that little time left in the game, and with how the game was going up until that point, the Giants, at the very least, don't lose it. The Giants absolutely come away from New Orleans with something. Instead, nothing. Absolutely nothing. And after the game, you can bet that the Giants were absolutely livid and furious about this, and understandably so. Said Aaron Thomas, the man who caught the touchdown that wasn't, it was a touchdown. I said something to the official, but it didn't do any good. He said I only had one foot in, but I came down with both in the same spot. The white part of the end zone was out of bounds, but I wasn't even in the white. Head coach Alex Webster was similarly upset, saying, "It's a shame too. Thomas was completely in. The only thing we can do is complain to Mark Duncan, the head of the officials, but I know it can't be changed now." Quarterback Fran Tarkenton, the man who threw the touchdown that wasn't, said on this play, "Sure, he was in. I said something to the ref, but the call was made. I thought it was good, and when the call went against us, I was shocked." And owner Wellington Mara not only disagreed with the call, but disagreed with how the field was painted, because if the end zone didn't go from gold to green to then a white sideline, and instead was just gold or green all the way around, then maybe the call would be different, because it was tough for the official to tell. Said Mara, "I think the way the end zone was painted was greatly at fault. The green was in bounds, and I think the official got confused. I can be fine for this kind of talk, but I'm not going to be. I can tell you that." From what I could tell, he was right. He did not get fined for this. You get the idea. The Giants thought it was a touchdown, and they were understandably appalled when it was not, because he very clearly was in. You don't even need instant replay or slow motion or to zoom in to say that. He was very clearly in the end zone with both feet in bounds. So that raises the question. Aside from the fact that the Giants lost this game, how did this impact the 1970 season? Well, it changed everything. And I truly mean everything. Let's say the referee gets that call right. The Giants win that game, and they finish the season with a 10-4 record. They win the NFC East as a result, and the wild card is determined via a coin flip between Detroit and Dallas. If Detroit won the flip, then the Giants would play the Lions. However, if Dallas won the flip, then the entire playoffs would change, because the wild card could not meet a team from the same division in the divisional round, meaning that the Giants would play either the Vikings or the 49ers in the divisional, and the Cowboys would play either the Vikings or the 49ers, which means we might not have the disaster at Kezar Stadium in the NFC Championship, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Maybe if the Giants make the playoffs and even go on a Super Bowl run, the Giants never trade Fran Tarkenton to Minnesota. Maybe if the Giants win this game, altering the playoff picture and getting Dallas out of the playoffs as a result, the 49ers make or even win the Super Bowl, and quarterback John Brodie gets a ring, a Super Bowl MVP, and rightfully gets his spot in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Maybe some lawsuits happen regarding the coin flip, especially since it would have been an untelevised flip, so we're just taking Pete Rozell's word for it. I'm not kidding. The ripple effect from this blown call was insane. This wasn't just your typical blown call that would not have mattered in the grand scheme of things. This was a blown call that quite literally changed everything. And what's even crazier about the game between these two teams behind me right here is that if you were a Saints fan, unless you were actually inside Tulane Stadium on that day, you probably had no idea that your team won by that slim of a margin. The game wasn't shown on TV. Every home game was blacked out due to rules back in 1970. You were listening to the game on the radio if you were a Saints fan, but I'm guessing that the Saints radio team didn't elaborate on the fact that the Giants got shafted. And I checked every newspaper in Louisiana for the week after, and not one of them mentioned this play. Not one of them mentioned that Thomas got his feet in bounds, but they ruled it out of bounds. So unless you watched This Week in Pro Football later in the week, or unless you were at the stadium, If you were a Saints fan, you had no idea just how lucky you truly were. There have been plenty of blown calls that changed the entire complexion of a season. It happened in 1980 when a pass interference penalty in the Cowboys-Eagles game was missed, thereby changing the seeding. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. It happened in 1982 when a blown call in the Broncos-Falcons game changed the entire playoff picture, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And it happened in 1989 when a blown call down by the goal line in the Seahawks-Bengals game basically eliminated the Bengals from the playoffs, despite the fact that they might have been, at least with the eye test, the best team in the AFC, and the only team that legitimately could have given San Francisco a run for its money if they met in the Super Bowl. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But perhaps none had the ripple effect, or were as bad, as the one you've been watching with Aaron Thomas in the 1970 game between the Giants and the Saints. Whether it's the first time you're watching it, or the 10th time you're watching it, it's just as bad and just as egregious. Because on this October day in 1970, the Giants were robbed in a giant way. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.